Hey there, fans of the strange, dark, and mysterious. If you're into stories that make your skin crawl and keep you up at night, then buckle up because this one's a doozy. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The stories. Church basement inventory revealed alleged proof of entry. The basement smelled like wet cardboard after last week's rain, and the fluorescent lights flickered with that jittery, tired kind of buzz. The line that mattered on the clipboard looked boring at first, but it carried a small number that should have been bigger. Her name was Nora LeClaire, age 34, community center custodian and part-time bookkeeper for the small church pantry. She had the Tuesday shift, which mostly meant moving pallets, counting cans, and scrubbing the concrete where the sump spat out rusty water. She wanted to finish early, pick up a thrifted lamp for her apartment, and call her sister about a family thing. The incident began when she saw the dented case of condensed soup sitting on the wrong pallet, with a slip stapled crooked. A volunteer wrote a note saying damaged during last drop, which did not match the neat handwriting she recognized from Sunday. The sump had overflowed during the storm, and the security cameras upstairs reportedly lost power around the same time. She checked the ledger, found last month's count for the soup, and tapped the line with a capped marker before reading twice. The numbers disagreed by 8 units, and the shrinkage column did not carry any explanation or initials. That should have thrown her for a minute, but a volunteer named Lyle had logged minor adjustments before, then forgotten to sign. She walked the aisles between pallets, past the bin of torn paperbacks, and the rack of winter coats that smelled like cedar chips. A faint drag mark curved through the thin crust of silt left by the flood, wide enough for a small hand truck wheel. It started by the loading door, then slipped behind the pantry shelves where the camera never had a sightline. Nora took photos on a battered phone, making sure the timestamp showed the date, then set the clipboard on a milk crate. She drew a simple diagram in her notebook, noting each pallet corner, then circled an area where floor paint looked scuffed. She counted the soup again, slowly, touching each can and speaking the numbers under her breath. 8 missing, she said, and it landed with more weight than she expected. She did not like accusing anyone, and the pantry had a habit of losing track during rush weeks. Still, the door to the loading ramp had fresh scrapes near the latch, and the volunteer key box upstairs had been sticky since the humidity climbed. The complication widened when she checked the box of hygiene kits and found a weird mix of travel bottles and 3 missing toothbrush packs. Those packs were counted by weight on a cheap scale, and the number on the sticky label did not match the ledger. The printer upstairs had jammed on Sunday, which meant someone finished the label by hand and skipped the second signature. A neighbor named Pete, age 57, retired mechanic, leaned down the stairwell and called everything steady down there. He helped with deliveries since his shop closed, and he kept spare bungee cords in his truck like trophies. She told him about the numbers, and he shrugged while scratching his jaw with a knuckle. Probably rain week jitters, he said. Then he looked at the drag mark and stopped talking for a beat. The mark led under a folding table, then faded near the coats. He pointed at the wall and said, "That outlet tripped last night. I reset it around 6. Nora asked who else came in yesterday, and Pete listed 2 volunteers by first names, then mentioned a teenager who picked up old pew cushions. She noted every name, added question marks where needed, then walked the perimeter slowly with her phone light near the baseboards. A glint showed beneath a stacking chair, so she nudged it aside and found a broken zip tie. The tie was the same size used for coat rack tags, but also the same size used on the loading door latch. She set it on the milk crate, then checked the thermostat in the storage room because the compressor sounded odd. The thermostat was set to a colder number than usual, and someone had switched the fan to constant instead of auto. She checked archived calls on the office phone, each scribbled on a pad by the reception desk, and saw a message about a refrigeration tech. The date on that message matched the storm, and the next line said, "Service postponed due to flooded bridge," which made sense. The fridge down in the basement had been stubborn for weeks, and everyone had opinions about it. The investigation took shape slowly, with tight steps that felt small until they did not. She photographed the drag, the zip tie, and each shelf with missing soup. She called the non-emergency number listed on the bulletin board, then explained she was not reporting a crime, only logging irregularities. The dispatcher told her to keep notes and offered a reference number she wrote at the top of the page. She interviewed a woman named Karina, age 42, school cafeteria worker, who came for a bag of pantry staples before her evening shift. Karina said she saw a man at the ramp door on Monday wearing a baseball cap that hid most of his face. He held a coat on one arm, and he carried a reusable bag with a grocery logo. He left quickly when a choir member came through with sheet music and coffee. Nora thanked her, wrote down the details, then asked Pete if a delivery truck had come without posting in the group chat. He said no trucks except the dairy driver who dropped crates outside after the storm. He showed his phone, scrolling through photos of the ramp, and pointed to a picture from early morning that showed the door closed with a new scratch near the bottom hinge. She opened the binder of fire inspection reports, looking for any change that registered during the outage. The inspection from 2 months ago said the exit alarm was functioning, and the last weekly test had initials from Lyle again. She went to the exit door alarm, pressed test, and watched the light flash, but heard no chirp. The battery had been pulled slightly, not fully removed, just eased out enough to break contact. She took a picture with the battery number visible, then slid it back in and heard the chirp, which made her flinch. Pete raised his eyebrows and said, "That is not wind," which sounded like a joke until he saw her keep writing. She checked a box of donation forms under the big table, where volunteers slipped notes when drop-offs came after hours. One envelope had muddy smears on the edge, and the handwriting said coats only with an underline that went too far. Inside sat a receipt from a thrift store with a timestamp from late Sunday and a note that said leave by ramp door because of stairs. Nora called the thrift store, asked a clerk if a man in a cap had bought bulk coats, and waited while the clerk checked. The clerk said yes. A tall man with a limp bought 9 coats and paid cash, then took the bus toward the river stop. Nora wrote that quickly, added the time, and drew a tiny bus icon without thinking. She opened the old laptop in the office and loaded the final footage saved before the outage, which barely showed the stair-top landing. A shadow crossed the landing on Monday evening at dusk, carrying something bulky, then returned minutes later with faster steps. The camera angle could not catch a face, only the cap brim and the arm load, which looked like quilt batting or a heavy sleeping bag. She thought about the soup, the hygiene packs, and the coats, then thought about the drag mark that ended near the rack. The rack had a hidden caster that always swiveled wrong, which left that same half-moon scrape when pushed sideways. She crouched and touched the caster, finding a smear of silt that did not match dust from raised corners. The twist snapped into view when she turned the soup case and saw a tiny sticker tucked behind the manufacturer's label, handwritten in blue ink. The sticker said Tuesday return hold with initials that were not Lyle's, which matched a habit from a former volunteer named Mateo. He left months ago after a family problem, but he signed returns with looping letters that everyone teased. Mateo's sister had asked for help in winter, and someone recalled she lived near the river park in a tent for a month. Witness statements from that season mentioned a man with a limp who avoided the main entrance because of pride. The archived calls showed a message from a restricted number on Monday evening, which said, "Ramp door buzzer broken, will circle back at dusk." Nora realized the inventory miscount for soup matched exactly the number of coats purchased at the thrift store on Sunday. 8 missing cans, 9 coats reported, and 3 toothbrush packs absent from the hygiene bin. She checked the program binder that tracked special requests, which listed a short note from 2 weeks ago about a family living in a truck with limited storage. Soup was labeled easy to heat, coats were labeled heavy but foldable, and toothbrushes were labeled priority for school-age kids. She looked at the ramp door again and saw a second set of scrapes, higher up, where a crutch might have knocked paint from the frame. She remembered Mateo broke his ankle years back, and the limp never fully left. Pete cleared his throat and said, "You think this is not a break-in, right?" Nora kept her voice steady, then said, "It looks like someone who knew the layout, who made sure the alarm stayed quiet, and who avoided asking directly because of shame." He rubbed his jaw, then nodded slowly as he watched her take a photo of the scraped paint. They called the non-emergency line again, and she read her notes while the dispatcher typed. The dispatcher said an officer could make an informational visit tomorrow, and advised them to secure the door and replace the tie. She logged the reference number, stapled the list of missing items to the daysheet, then wrote a clear statement about suspected entry without damage for records only. She left a message for the pantry coordinator, age 51, paraeducator, explaining the situation with careful words about the storm and the power hiccup. She suggested moving the coat rack upstairs during inventory days and adding a second sign-off when labels were handwritten. She also suggested leaving a clear path for people who struggled with stairs, which sounded like a tiny policy shift hidden inside a counting problem. An hour later, a choir member named Lorna stopped by for her binder, and Nora asked if she had seen anyone at the ramp on Monday. Lorna said a man waited near the dumpster just before the thunder started again, holding a bag and looking anxious. She brought him into the vestibule briefly, offered water, and pointed him toward the office for assistance. But he left before she finished tuning the piano. Nora thanked her, logged the time, then matched it with the shadow on the final footage that crossed the landing at dusk. The puzzle fit without heroics, and the proof sat in quiet things like stickers and scratches and silt. The pantry had not been ransacked, only visited by someone who treated the space like an old workplace where he still belonged a little. She printed a fresh sign for the ramp that said "Ring bell twice for assistance," then taped it high where bus riders would see it. She taped another sign next to the loading latch that reminded volunteers to check the exit alarm light before locking. Pete found a spare battery for the alarm in a drawer and switched it while whistling a few off-key notes. Before leaving, she took one last slow walk with the clipboard, checking counts, finding that the numbers now made a practical sort of sense. The soup miscount lined up with the return sticker, the drag mark matched the broken caster, and the exit alarm explained the quiet door. The proof of entry was not dramatic, yet it was enough to tell a story that accounted for every small change. The next afternoon, the coordinator called back after speaking with a patrol officer who agreed to mark the report as information only. The officer reportedly checked dispatch logs from the storm night and confirmed multiple power blips across the block, which could explain the camera outage without conspiracy. The coordinator also reached Mateo through a community contact, who acknowledged taking coats and supplies, then offered to meet with her to return the soup or sign for it officially. Nora sat at the folding table and wrote a short summary for the pantry records, keeping it plain and careful and believable. She described the season's pressure, the storm, the small mistakes, and the way people try to preserve dignity when they are worn thin. She ended with a simple line about counting what matters and leaving a light where it can be found. She locked the loading door with a fresh tie, turned the thermostat back to normal, and unplugged the stubborn fridge for a counted 10 before restarting. The compressor settled into a softer hum that made the space feel less anxious, and the fluorescent lights kept their flicker but seemed less harsh than earlier. She put the clipboard away, then washed the silt from her hands until the water ran clear. On her way up the steps, she looked back at the neat rows of cans and the rack of coats that hung like quiet witnesses. The basement did not feel like a crime scene. It felt like a place that absorbed hard weather and kept doing its small work. The inventory told the story the way ledgers often do, not loud, not dramatic, but steady and specific enough to be true. Pete waited by the door and asked if she still wanted to find that lamp after her shift, and she smiled and said yes. He held the door as they stepped into the thin sunshine that follows a week of rain, where water still shone in shallow puddles. She made a mental note to buy a pack of batteries and write bigger labels, then walked toward the sidewalk with an easier stride. Later that week, the coordinator posted a message thanking the volunteers for patience and reminding everyone to sign twice when handwriting labels. The note also said the ramp bell worked again and that the basement alarm had a new battery with a date written in marker. A final line invited anyone needing help to knock during open hours and to leave a note if mobility made the stairs hard. Nora kept the broken zip tie in a drawer with a handful of odd things that never quite fit anywhere. She wrote the date on a card and tucked it with the tie as a simple reminder that proof can be small and stubborn. The basement went back to smelling like cardboard instead of worry, and the flicker of the lights felt ordinary again. She told her sister about the lamp and then about the inventory, and they both laughed quietly at how much a can of soup can reveal. The town kept moving around them in a slow, practical rhythm that ignored weather until it had to pay attention. The story rested inside a file folder without drama, but with enough careful detail to be respectfully believed. The stories. Why this librarian flagged a proof of life card. The card did not belong in a stack of overdue notices, yet there it sat with block letters that actually read proof of life. The wording was too blunt for a library reminder, and the date matched a missing persons flyer that had quietly vanished last winter. Maris Kerner was 39, and she worked the morning desk at a small community library in a prairie town that had long trains and big skies. She checked returns, cleared fines, and tried to keep the printer from chewing student papers, hoping for a dull day with a long lunch. Her goal was simple: close the backlog of donations before closing, then update the archive request for a retired teacher who loved local history. The plan changed when she tapped the card with one finger because the letters felt pressed in a way that was not like normal ink. She knew the circulation trays by heart, and this one had been emptied by a student helper with careful notes on every slip. The proof of life card had no barcode or call number, and the stock felt heavier than the free postcards the library ordered every spring. A sticker on the back said Bridgeview Motel, and that place had shown up in quiet conversations when a woman stopped coming to water aerobics. Neighbors had reportedly asked the police for wellness checks, and dispatch logs showed 2 visits with no contact and no forced entry recorded. Maris asked the student helper if any patron left a note at the desk, and he shook his head and said nothing unusual had happened. She opened the staff notebook and found a scribble from last night that read, "Man with scar asked about photo paper and left in a hurry." The notebook entry had a time near closing, plus the initials of a part-timer who did not scare easily, which made her stomach tighten. She made a photocopy of the card, then slipped the original into a book cover to keep it flat, planning to ask her supervisor after lunch. The timing gnawed at her because last night rain had cut the power for 10 minutes and the cameras blinked back with their clocks wrong. She checked the FOIA camera on the old monitor by the office door, where a green light flickered like a tired firefly across the screen. The video showed a tall figure in a work jacket standing at the flyer board, then turning toward the desk before the feed glitched to static. A minute later, the screen returned, and the figure had moved behind a pillar, which made no sense since that area was staff-only after hours. She printed stills from the footage and laid them beside the card, noticing the jacket pocket shape that looked stuffed with something flat and stiff. The card edges had faint gray smudges, like they had been handled with dusty hands, and one corner showed a tiny sticker that looked torn. She peeled lint from the sticker and saw a number, which matched the last digits of a local hotline used for flood relief long ago. Her supervisor was out on an errand, so she decided to document everything, knowing she was not a detective, but details kept people honest. Maris called the non-emergency line and described the odd card, the motel sticker, and the camera glitch near closing, keeping her tone steady. The dispatcher asked her to hold, then returned and said a patrol would swing by, and asked her to secure the item until an officer arrived. While waiting, she opened the public catalog and searched Bridgeview, which pulled up a donation record from 2 summers back with a box of maps. The donor was listed as private family, and an address field said held for pickup with a note that their phone had been disconnected that year. A patron named Delma walked up with a jar of quarters for prints and saw the stills on the counter, then whispered that the jacket looked familiar. Delma taught sewing in the church basement, and said a man with a melted-looking scar came by Wednesday asking for a needle and strong thread. He had reportedly talked about fixing a tarp at that motel on the highway, and he had paid with a crumpled gift card that looked homemade. She also remembered the man asking if the library still did photo classes, then smiling without humor when she said the classes ended years ago. Maris wrote everything in the staff notebook, then cropped the foyer still to circle the jacket pocket with a blunt pencil, careful not to tear it. She opened her phone and checked an old neighborhood group where a post from late winter asked for tips about a missing woman named Ria. The post used the first name only and said she liked thrift store puzzles, and the comments mentioned a motel room that smelled like bleach. A follow-up comment linked to a news clip from 2019 about a different incident at the same motel, which felt like a bad pattern. Officer Teagan arrived and listened, then photographed the card and the stills, and asked if anyone had tried to peel the motel sticker further. He turned the card under the desk lamp and breathed out because the raised letters were not printed, but pressed through from the other side. He slipped a thin blade beneath the sticker and lifted it enough to read a second word, which looked like the start of a last name. He asked if the library kept archived calls for the front desk phone, and Maris said the system stored recent messages on a shared drive. They played back last night messages and heard a clipped voice ask for the hours, then whisper ask for the archivist who knows the maps. The message ended with a scrape and a hotel air unit hum, the kind that never warms a room, and they both felt the hair on their arms rise. Tegan asked if anyone here used the title archivist, and Maris said the nearest was her, since she handled the local history binders and photo scan. He nodded and said that meant the caller likely knew the library as a place where old things were kept safe, which made the card more urgent. Maris pulled the old donation form and found the private family listed a small storage locker by the river bridge as their preferred pickup site. She searched the county records computer and found a title transfer after the spring floods of 2017. When storage units were damaged, one line showed the locker contents listed as personal papers and photo negatives, then a note that a relative disputed the disposal months later. The motel had reused the locker number as a room code during renovations, according to a flyer in the staff scrapbook that covered local businesses. The proof of life wording now looked less mysterious and more like a desperate signal from someone who knew how librarians react to exact phrases. Tegan requested a welfare check at the motel and asked Maris to print the donation records, the foyer stills, and the message transcript for the file. He also asked if she had seen someone with a needle pack from the makerspace drawer, and she said the pack went missing last week after closing. He thanked her and stepped away to call, while Maris carefully slid the card into an acid-free sleeve used for rare pamphlets and early maps. A maintenance worker named Oren came in to fix the humming light over the copy station, and he noticed the motel name on the sleeve. He mentioned a rumor that their laundry machines ran all night, louder than any other place in town, like they were washing heavy canvas. He also said a delivery truck sometimes idled by the back doors in the rain, which he saw while plowing the lot during a late storm this spring. He looked at the foyer still and pointed to the figure shoes, saying they looked like rubber overshoes that left squeaky prints on polished floors. Maris opened the incident binder for building issues and found a slip from 2 months earlier about wet footprints near the history room door. The footprints were noted as narrow and shallow, like someone walked carefully to avoid noise, and the cleaner found a small thread stuck to a vent. The thread was taped to the page, a gray synthetic line that matched heavy-duty tarp edging from camping gear, which made her pulse quicken. She copied that page for Tegan, then checked the missing person post again, where a comment mentioned a puzzle with one piece sharp enough to cut. A second patrol car rolled past the windows, then slowed and parked, and Tegan met the officers near the vestibule and pointed at the sleeve. They spoke quietly, then one officer asked if the library had a public scanner capable of high resolution, and Maris said yes in the makerspace. They asked to scan the card under different light angles, which she facilitated, and the image showed faint impressions of letters on the back. The letters formed a simple phrase, which read, "Keep the lights on," and beneath it a date from late winter, which matched the first storm week. The motel manager arrived with an officer, having been contacted for a consent check, and he looked nervous as he scanned the card in the stills. He said the scarred man was not staff, but he rented a weekly room paid with a prepaid card that never seemed to run out, which sounded odd. He also admitted that a housekeeper found a stack of cut postcards in a trash bag and that he told her to toss it because business needed calm. He finally said a guest had reported a blinking red camera in the vending room, which he had not installed, and that the wires led to a locked door. Maris asked if the vending room had a public table where people leave free magazines, and the manager nodded and said the table was always crowded. She remembered the library boxes of maps donated by the private family and wondered if those boxes ever made it to storage, given the flood note. Tegan connected the details aloud, saying someone could cut old map postcards and press letters by hand, then seed them where a librarian would find them. He said the phrase "archivist who knows the maps" pointed directly at the library, not the police, probably because the caller feared being dismissed. The officers requested to check the motel with the manager, while Tegan asked Maris to remain available by phone and to document any visitors. She nodded and watched the patrol cars pull out, then went to the makerspace scanner and increased the light angle on the card once more. A faint watermark appeared, not from the library, but from a local print shop that closed in 2015 after a family illness. She called the shop number, which now forwarded to a nephew, and he said remaining stock from the shop had been sold to a flea market outside town. Maris drove her own car on her lunch break to that flea market, a windy row of sheds with tables covered in tools and blank cardstock. She asked a vendor about heavy postcard stock, and he pointed at a box labeled Miscellaneous Prints, which included 2 stacks with the same watermark. Under the stacks, she found a small roll of black camera tape with faint dust, the same tape the library used to secure cords along the baseboards. The vendor said a man with a scar bought similar stock days ago and paid cash and asked about a motel discount that no one had heard of. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tegan that said they found a hidden door behind the vending machines, which opened into a laundry tunnel. He wrote that a woman had been located on a cot with her hands taped, alert and speaking, and asking for a librarian by job title. He added that the woman was taken to a clinic and that she confirmed she made the cards on old map stock to get attention without causing panic. She had placed the card in the library because she remembered a winter program where librarians showed how paper holds impressions from firm pressure. Maris returned to the library and sat at the staff desk, quietly letting the fluorescent hum settle back into its usual dull chorus. She wrote a detailed account for the file, starting with the first odd feel of the letters and ending with the clinic update from Tegan. She noted each source she had used, including the archived calls, the foyer footage, the staff notebook, the donation records, and the local forums. She kept the tone factual and steady, because stories grow teeth when you rush them, and details keep those teeth from biting the wrong person. Tegan came back near closing and thanked her, then asked if the card could be logged as evidence, with a copy kept for internal records. She agreed and placed the sleeve in a labeled envelope, then printed a plain copy for the library binder and returned the stills to the folder. He told her the woman would be interviewed later and that she had given a first name only and asked that the librarian not be publicly named. He also said the scarred man had left during a shift change and that nearby cameras picked up a truck with a tarp that matched the gray thread. Maris locked the foyer board and removed early flyers that were no longer current, then called the part-timer who wrote the notebook entry. The part-timer said the man with the scar waited during the lights outage, then moved with purpose, like he knew where cameras were blind. He had asked one odd question, which was whether the library kept proof cards for photo projects, like some places did before digital was everywhere. She remembered telling him no, then watching him smile without humor before the power returned and the hallway smelled like wet rubber for a moment. The library closed on time, and the night outside felt clean after the afternoon wind cleared dust from the air and pushed the clouds east. Maris sat in her car and listened to the engine idle, thinking about how people reach for words when they are afraid and choose them carefully. Proof of life is a phrase borrowed from terrible stories, yet it also names the basic promise that someone will be seen and counted. A card is not much, yet it travels well, and it can slip into a tray or a pocket and carry a message past careless eyes. In the following week, a quiet update landed in the local paper, calling the event a welfare recovery with cooperation from community partners. No names were printed, and no hero language was used, which suited Maris, who believed steady attention beats loud proclamations most days. The library ordered new bulbs for the foyers, reset the camera clocks, and updated the incident binder with a page that stressed prompt reporting. They also added a simple note at the desk that said unusual items should be logged and secured, which felt small and useful at the same time. The motel changed ownership according to public filings, and the new manager posted a notice that laundry hours would end before midnight. Tegan later said a search found a stack of cut map cards behind a panel, along with black tape and a binder clipped with motel receipts. The binder held phone numbers written in large, shaky script, and a single printed line that read, "Keep the lights on," which now felt like a prayer. The woman who had asked for a librarian agreed to give a short statement through an advocate, thanking staff and neighbors for noticing quiet things. Maris kept a copy of the card scan behind the desk, not for display, but for training new helpers on why details matter even on slow days. When a patron asked how the week was going, she said it was steady and that they were tidying up the archives and fixing the foyer lights. She added that the library was a good place for messages that needed safe hands, because people here dealt in proof every single day. Then she went back to checking returns, because the work rolls forward, and a day with quiet shelves is often the loudest kind of relief. The stories. This motel room voicemail raised a separate question. On a rainy Tuesday, near the end of tourist season, a motel room voicemail carried a question that did not belong. It turned a tired end of shift into something careful and strange, and it started with a blinking red light. Dorian Pike worked nights at the Northway Motor Inn, 37, a patient manager who fixed things others ignored. The place sat off a service road past a truck stop, with a diner and a feed store as neighbors. He started that shift with a simple goal: balance the register, finish the towel count, and coax the ice machine back alive. The storm slowed arrivals, and the security monitor rolled its quiet grayscale loop of the parking lot. Housekeeping left a note about room 12, the kind of note other managers forgot to read. The bed looked unused after checkout, the television glowed at low volume, and the phone message light blinked at eye level. He carried a spare key, pushed the door open, and smelled damp carpet and motel soap. Nothing surprising. The news channel murmured through commercials, a static map of counties he could name without trying. On the nightstand sat a spiral notebook half full of block letters, a takeout cup, and a key card with the room number worn. He pressed the voicemail button with his knuckle because the button shocked him once in summer. A male voice filled the room with a flat question that stopped his hand, like a bad chord laid wrong. The voice asked, "Did you move the smoke detector again?" And then silence, followed by the system tone and cutoff. He replayed it twice, and the question felt like a pebble in a shoe, something to be dealt with. Smoke detectors did not get moved by guests without reason, and nothing about the room said routine or careless. Dorian checked the detector on the ceiling, a cheap white unit that did not match the others on the hall. The motel used one supplier for replacements, and this casing lacked their sticker and the penciled date inside. He stood on the chair, unscrewed the ring, and found fresh scuffs around the mounting plate, as if removed recently. The unit felt heavier than a sensor should, and the test light never flashed, which meant battery or guts. He set it down on the table, and the vent above the television rattled just a little with the wind. He turned off the television, let the room get quiet, and heard faint tapping through the vent to the next room. The motel had a habit of telling its secrets through noise, and he had learned that language over years. He stepped into the hall and knocked on room 14, where a regular was finishing a long week of fieldwork. Quinn Hauer was 29, a cell tower contractor with a tool bag and a precise way of speaking. Quinn opened the door and said, "Heard the tapping, thought it was heat. But it kept hitching, like somebody counting seconds." Dorian nodded, thanked him, and walked back to room 12 with the detector in his hands and a growing list. He checked the guest ledger for that room, found the name Shane Bennett written in rough ballpoint yesterday afternoon. The rate was paid in cash with a $20 deposit, and there was a note about requesting a high floor. The motel only had 2 floors, which made the request sound like reflex, not preference, and it bothered him. He logged into the creaking PBX console behind the office door, a beige box that stored more than it admitted. The system kept message times, not caller numbers, but it stored archived call counts and extension traces within limits. The voice message timestamp put the call at 4:21 this morning when he had been home asleep. The system marked it as external to the motel, but without a number, which meant blocked or masked through a service. He played the message once more through the PBX speaker, and this time he listened past the words to the air. There was a faint horn in the background, not a car, something long and low that cut through the compressor hum. The town had 2 train crossings, one near the elevator factory, the other near the river access by Mill Road. The factory horn sounded higher by habit, and the river crossing had a long, lonely tone that travelers remembered. He wrote train horn in the notebook, then dialed the non-emergency line and described a suspicious device in room 12. He kept the language careful and factual, and the dispatcher asked for his name, then said a unit would respond. Housekeeper Irina Kowalski stopped by the desk to clock out. 58. Quiet. A 10-year veteran of the place. She saw the detector on the counter and said she smelled glue when she changed linens, thought it came from that. He asked if she saw anyone in room 12 after checkout, and she said only a woman with a baseball cap. She had a service bucket and a ring of keys, and Irina thought she was with maintenance, since she walked like staff. There were two maintenance guys by payroll. Neither wore caps, and neither worked Tuesdays after 3 in the afternoon. He wrote this down, then checked a clipboard of deliveries, and found a package signed by someone not on schedule. The box came yesterday morning for guest Bennett, signed by a scrawl that did not match any front desk initials. It contained a replacement smoke detector per the note, which made the blinking voicemail question feel heavier. Dorian carried the box to the office, found bubble wrap inside, plus a cutout where the detector had Saturday, tape residue stuck in a neat circle on the cardboard, and a tiny zip bag with nothing in it fell from a seam. He looked at the detector again under the desk lamp and noticed a slot behind the grill where no slot should be. He slid a paperclip in and clicked against something spring-loaded, which offered and then refused to move. The responding officer arrived while the storm thickened, and his boots left dark prints that dried like islands. He introduced himself as Deputy Holloway, 40, calm voice, and asked for the room key, the voicemail, and the timeline. Dorian played the message for him on the office speaker, and the train horn showed itself again under the words. Holloway wrote it down, then called in the serial from the detector, and the brand came back to a discount dropshipper. They walked to room 12 with the box, and Holloway took photos with a little camera that hated the low light. He gave Dorian latex gloves from his pocket, then pointed at the slot and said he would rather not break it. Dorian tried the paperclip again, this time with a little twist and a push, and the plate popped forward an inch. Inside sat something that was not a sensor, a puck with a lens barely visible, and a microcard at the edge. He did not pull it, he did not touch the lens, he just looked at Holloway, whose jaw tightened for 3 beats. The deputy called dispatch and asked for a detective on call, then told Dorian to step back and breathe. The motel office had a rule about honesty with guests, which worked until honesty touched evidence and risk. Dorian printed a sign for the counter that said, "Service delay for weather," and the storm covered that small necessary lie. Holloway kept the room closed and waited for the detective, while Dorian returned to the PBX to audit messages. He printed the log for the last 2 days, circled 3 external calls to room 12, all between midnight and 5. He played the first 2 messages carefully, and they were empty hang-ups, with the same horn underneath and 1 faint laugh. He resisted all guessing and wrote horn consistent in a margin, then underlined the time of the 3rd message. He checked the security drive for the hallway, and the camera caught only the tops of heads and a bit of shoulder. At 3:12 this morning, a person in a cap walked by with a tote, turned left, and vanished from frame. Dorian paused on the frame and noted the sleeve stripes, a set of 2 pale bands near the wrist. Irina had seen a cap on the woman, and the frame showed hair tucked tight, with a loose strand at the neck. Detective Renner arrived with a kit and a steady patience, a mid-40s investigator who disliked motel carpet. She listened to the voicemail twice, glanced at the detector, and asked Dorian to walk her through intake and checkout. He explained the cash payment, the request for a high floor, and the delivery for a detector that should not change. She wrote as he talked, asked about prior incidents, and he mentioned 2 privacy complaints from summer travelers. Those complaints stopped after he replaced room units from the same run, and he had kept the receipts and dates. He pulled copies from the accordion file, and she photographed them, then asked whether any rooms shared vent passageways. He described the vent layout, straight shaft between rooms in pairs, with thin walls that carried sound farther than comfort. Renner nodded and walked to room 14, asked Quinn to step into the hall, and confirmed the tapping report. Quinn described the pace like a metronome, not random, 2 taps, then a short pause, repeated until the thunder started. Renner wrote it down, and Dorian drew the pattern in a margin, then realized something he had missed earlier today. The television in room 12 was on the news channel at low volume, which travelers often used as a decoy. Some people left it on to pretend someone was inside, which meant the room might have been staged after a quick exit. Renner opened the detector with gloves and eased the card into a tiny envelope, then sealed it with her initials. She asked Dorian about any computers to view file sizes, not contents, just metadata, and he shook his head no. She used her agency laptop to check what the card held, and the screen reflected in the blank television glass. The card contained multiple files named by date and time, a standard naming scheme, which meant scheduled recording, not motion. Renner closed the laptop without opening anything and said the specifics would wait for a warrant and a lab. She asked for the guest profile again, and he gave the same summary, plus the note about the signed delivery receipt. Dorian returned to the box and saw a faint watermark in the cardboard that read Consolidated Freight with a Town. The town sat by the river tracks where the Longhorn lived, and the company ran a warehouse near the ramp. He wrote the company down as an external lead, then called the number printed on their listing from a web search. He asked, in his perfectly polite desk voice, whether any packages left for a motel guest yesterday morning. The dispatcher said they handed one small box to a contractor with a name that matched no employee on file. It was recorded on their log with a time, and the signature block contained the same scrawl as his earlier photocopy. Renner thanked him for the call, took the information, and said she would handle any next contact with that company. She requested the spiral notebook from the room, and Dorian placed it in a bag, pages open to the block letters. The letters contained hotel names and highway exits, a list of routes that matched a traveler who did not like surprises. Some lines included cable channel numbers, others included lamplight wattages, and one included the word ceiling with a star. Dorian remembered a complaint from 2 weeks ago from a different guest about a beeping detector in room 5. He checked his maintenance log and found he replaced that unit on a Wednesday after a short argument about deposit charges. He fetched the old detector from the storage shelf, where broken things went to wait for disposal, and compared its weight. The broken one felt light as expected, and the one from room 12 felt like two of them taped together. He unscrewed the broken one and found no strange slot, only dust, a dead battery, and the usual brittle plastic. Renner watched from the doorway and nodded, then answered her phone, and her yes sounded like cautious confirmation. The non-emergency dispatcher had pulled 2 archived calls from the spring that sounded similar, not identical, but close. Each referenced a detector, each asked whether it had been moved, and both targeted rooms paid in cash and late. Renner asked Dorian to print any copies of photo identification kept on file, and he showed the log policy instead. The inn did not photocopy identification unless the card used for payment had a name mismatch or a mismatch with booking. He looked at the lobby camera track for the check-in, and the frame showed a jacket with sleeve stripes again. The face never lifted to the lens, and the cap brim hid most features, but the build matched the hallway pass. The storm eased into a steady pour, the kind that makes a street look polished, and the motel sign clicked. Renner gave Dorian a statement form and asked him to write what he did and why, as precisely as possible. He wrote that a voicemail raised a secret question about a smoke detector, which is not a thing guests ask. He wrote that the detector was wrong for the room, that its weight felt off, and that a slot existed. He wrote that a horn in the background suggested a location near the river tracks and that a freight watermark helped. He wrote that a woman with a cap carried a tote down the hall, and that tapping came through the vent. Renner finished securing the room and returned the hallway to regular use, with a note to keep room 12 closed. She told Dorian that similar devices had surfaced in short-term rentals nearby, and that his details tightened the pattern. She thanked Irena and Quinn for their help, then left with Holloway and the sealed card and the odd detector. Dorian stood in the quiet office and watched the parking lot glow under a light that had survived 4 storms this month. He made copies of everything for the file, then sat with the register and finished what he started hours earlier. The ice machine hummed to life with a stubborn cough, which felt like a small mercy after the nervous work. 2 days later, Renner called to say the voicemail mattered more than he realized because of the horn and the freight. The freight record placed a contractor truck at the warehouse near the river during the call window before dawn. She said the case would likely spread across jurisdictions and that his notes already sat in a shared folder. She did not share more, and he did not ask, because he understood the slow way these things must move to hold. Quinn checked out with a handshake and a tight thanks, and Irena started a new hallway routine that included ceiling checks. The motel added a policy line about devices, not because it fixed the world, but because it set a tone. On the next Tuesday, the phone light blinked again in a different room, and Dorian felt a breath catch. He pressed the button and heard a normal message from a family asking for extra towels, and he laughed because relief deserves sound. He still thought about the spiral notebook, about the starred word ceiling, and about the staged television glow. He thought about the simple question that did not belong and how such questions sometimes open doors no one planned. Travelers came and went, the storm season thinned, and the parking lot felt like a stage that forgot its lines. Dorian kept the office tidy and the camera lenses clean, and he learned to trust the hairs rising on his arm. The stories. This highway turnout kept a missing trucker's toll receipt. The turnout sits between scrub pines and a windblown ditch, and it held a toll receipt longer than anyone realized. The receipt came from a night when a driver stopped for 6 quiet minutes, then disappeared beyond the concrete barriers. Dorian Hale worked highway maintenance for the county, age 37, and he took pride in simple, measurable things. His Thursday assignment was routine line checks, with a side errand to clear debris from an overflow grate near the eastbound turnout. The morning felt ordinary as he idled the orange pickup, sipped gas station coffee, and clipped a laminated checklist to his clipboard. He pulled on gloves, set cones, then walked the shoulder counting reflective posts, and he hummed a tune he could not place. At the turnout, he knelt by the grated culvert, where stray plastic and crushed cans made a soggy stripe against rusted mesh. A folded paper showed only a blue stripe and a timestamp smudged by rain. The paper was stiff, thin, and heat-printed, the kind used at toll plazas that still handed cash change. He eased it open with a screwdriver tip, read a plaza name he recognized, and traced a time almost exactly 2 years back. The fare matched a commercial axle count, and a faint pen mark read Brandt in shaky block letters. Dorian knew the surname because his father still kept a clipped article about a driver named Silas Brandt. The story said a veteran hauler left a warehouse near midnight, then failed to deliver a load of drywall and never returned calls. Investigators canvassed truck stops, pulled camera footage, and searched an exit ramp pond where a guardrail once stood bent. The county replaced that rail within a week, and Dorian helped pour the new anchors under a bitter early spring sky. He remembered the way troopers scanned the water with side-scan gear, and he remembered a family photo taped to a utility pole. The picture showed a smiling man with deep crow feet lines, wearing a ball cap shaped by years of Sunday. He set the receipt on the warm truck hood, and he felt a nervous pull he did not want to ignore. He radioed dispatch for a non-emergency inquiry, explained he found what looked like a toll slip, and requested guidance from the patrol office. The operator took his badge number, logged the time, and said an investigator would call once she could review the old case file. The call came after lunch from an investigator named Fenna Ortiz, who spoke carefully but asked direct questions. She confirmed the surname matched the missing driver, and she asked Dorian to secure the paper in a clean envelope. She told him to keep working as usual because she needed to check archived calls and bridge camera timestamps before driving out. He locked the receipt in a plastic map pouch, finished the grate work, then walked the turnout with a slower, sharper eye. The asphalt showed faint striations where heavy rigs often idled, and a single bolt head gleamed bright against dull gravel. A cracked mirror shard lay half-buried near the weeds, reflecting a tuft of cloud that moved like something alive. He logged the shard as debris, snapped a photo with a timestamp, and saved it among his maintenance images from earlier weeks. The images, he realized, showed the same corner of concrete week after week, and the corner looked slightly cleaner today. That thought returned him to the culvert, where the receipt had been wedged behind a lip most drivers never noticed. The patrol cruiser pulled up near too, and Investigator Ortiz stepped out carrying a clipboard and a small camera. She was mid-40s, concise, and she asked for the sequence from his arrival to the moment he opened the folded paper. He described the gloves, the screwdriver tip, the awkward angle at the grate, and the exact place where the paper caught. She photographed the culvert, the hood of his truck, and his gloves, then placed the receipt in a fresh evidence sleeve. She asked whether he had heard of any scavengers or roadside sellers who might pick through turnouts in quiet hours. He shook his head and mentioned night fishermen at the quarry road and a retired lineman who walked his dog near dawn. Ortiz had already checked dispatch logs from the night Silas vanished, and those logs showed 2 calls near that turnout. One came from a motorist reporting a stalled box truck on the shoulder, which cleared itself before a trooper arrived. The second came from a bridge camera technician, noting a brief outage around 2:12, which was dismissed as routine. She asked permission to pull Dorian's maintenance photos, the ones covering every week around the 2-year mark. He agreed without hesitation and forwarded the entire folder, even the blurry shots he usually deleted at the office. Ortiz scrolled methodically, then paused on an image taken exactly 3 days after the reported outage at the bridge camera. The photo showed the same culvert, same weed line, and a crumpled label half hidden under wet pine needles. Ortiz zoomed until the pixels blurred, then noted a fragment that looked like the corner of a toll slip. She compared that week to the next, where the culvert looked cleaner, then to the next, where more wind-blown trash filled the grid again. Dorian pointed toward the bright bolt he noticed earlier, which did not appear in his older photos at all. Ortiz crouched and confirmed the bolt was new stainless, fixed through a small angle bracket that sat flush to the curb. She said the bracket was not standard for that guardrail style, and it looked like something installed to anchor a temporary brace. They walked the rail from cone to cone, and she stopped at a spot where the soil sloped into a greasy black ribbon. The smell suggested old brake dust and gear oil, and the vegetation showed a flattened path that looked more deliberate than random. She made a note to have a canine unit sweep the embankment later, and she radioed for a drone with a thermal camera. Across the turnout, a small convenience store faced the service road, and a metal bell chimed when the door opened. The clerk on duty was a woman named Karen Duplessis, age 29, who brewed coffee and stocked shelves during quiet afternoons. She said plenty of trucks idled at that turnout, but she remembered a white day cab sitting without a trailer once. Karen produced a spiral notebook where she kept odd notes to settle change disputes and lottery recollections. On a page dated 2 years back, she wrote, "Night truck, no trailer, short man, hat, hands shaking, paid in cash for cigarettes." She told them the man left a toll receipt on the counter by accident, then grabbed it quickly and stuffed it into his jacket. Ortiz photographed the notebook and asked about timing, and Karen said she wrote the note after midnight while the bell still echoed. She admitted she might be off by 20 minutes, but she remembered the man said something that felt like a warning. He said the word toll like it mattered. Then he asked if anyone was working late at the bridge control shed. The bridge control shed sat above the river, spanned 3 miles east, where cameras watched traffic and signboards scrolled travel times. Ortiz called a former technician named Orville Pacheco, age 62, who kept his own notes in a faded green ledger. He said he logged an unexpected visit that same night. When a man in a reflective vest asked for camera reset access, Orville said the visitor showed a badge sleeve without a badge, which made him cautious, and he refused to grant access. He called the after-hours line to report a vendor mismatch, and the line recorded his message with the time he spoke. The line, according to archived records, Ortiz had already pulled, captured footsteps, a door-open sound, and muffled traffic noise. They returned to the turnout while the drone lifted into a steady grid pattern, and Ortiz asked Dorian for his honest read. He believed the receipt had stayed near that lip for months, then shifted forward during a recent heavy storm last spring. The spidering of dirt on the paper edges matched the way silt moves when culverts push water hard toward daylight. The drone operator flagged a heat anomaly under the slope where the grease ribbon angled into brush and sage. A buried object held temperature longer than the surrounding dirt, and its shape suggested a long chassis with a missing rear section. Dorian stared at the screen while Ortiz arranged a small excavation crew and a wrecker with a winch and safety chains. The bucket peeled turf like old cloth, revealing crumpled metal painted white and a scraped cereal plate near a crushed step. The cab had separated from a frame that showed clean-cut ends, not torn ends, and Dorian felt his stomach tighten hard. The clean ends suggested someone removed the trailer hardware with purpose, then eased the cab down the slope intentionally. Ortiz called the medical examiner and the state commercial unit, then stepped away to speak to a number marked confidential. She returned with a firm face and told Dorian she needed one more favor while crews secured the scene. She asked him to drive to the scrapyard 2 exits west, where way logs sometimes kept more truth than anyone expected. At the yard, a supervisor named Harlan Voss, age 55, carried a tablet loaded with camera stills and cash tickets. He said people brought cut frames to his scale weekly, and he flagged one ticket dated 3 days after the reported outage. The still showed a flatbed hauling a truck frame section without a cab, strapped tight with chains and cheap ratchet binders. The driver wore a reflective vest, a hat pulled low, and gloves that looked new, and his hands seemed unsteady at the counter. Harlan remembered the hands because the driver dropped a toll receipt while counting bills, then apologized like he was late for something else. The camera caught the corner of the paper, and the blue stripe matched the one on Dorian's find. Ortiz requested the original video and the ticket, then compared plate numbers with the state registry and commercial inspections. The plate belonged to a hauler who reported his flatbed stolen for one night, then found it returned with fresh chain marks. He never filed a full report because the trailer came back clean, and he feared insurance delays could wreck his month. Piece by piece, a picture formed that did not look like a ghost or a river taking what it wanted. A driver left a warehouse near midnight, stopped at the turnout, and met someone who needed the cab but not the frame. The someone posed as a camera contractor, killed a low-priority feed, then arranged to hide a cab where eyes rarely linger long. The twist came from a small sticker inside the cab roof, which a trooper peeled away from dust with a gentle thumb. It showed a fleet service company that kept neat records, including oil changes, mileage notes, and a knack for precise dates. Their files showed work performed 2 weeks before the disappearance, and the mechanic wrote a side note about a key copy. The mechanic wrote that a third key was requested by a man who said he was the night dispatcher, and he paid in cash. The mechanic thought nothing of it until Ortiz called. Then he remembered the man never signed the usual authorization line. The shop camera showed the man wearing a vest like a contractor, and the badge sleeve again appeared strangely empty. Ortiz pulled toll plaza footage from the night in question and synchronized it with the scrapyard stills and the bridge notes. The day cab crossed the plaza as expected, and the timestamp matched the receipt tucked in the culvert lip. The truck exited near the turnout, camera glare washed the lane, then resumed with a frame that missed a single clear license view. Witness statements placed a white day cab idling without a trailer, and a clerk recorded restless hands that left a paper corner. A technician refused an access request, and a maintenance line captured footsteps and a door open sound after the call ended. A stolen flatbed left and returned in a narrow window, and a cut frame crossed a scale with a driver who spoke softly. The medical examiner recovered remains from the cab, and dental records from a previous injury matched a profile kept by his dentist. The family received a closed answer shaped like sorrow rather than speculation, because speculation had gnawed at them for years. The drywall load had been simple, the route had been familiar, and the end had hidden in a slope beside a lonely turnout. Motive came faster than Dorian guessed, and it turned on a small insurance clause that rewarded a competing carrier. The person posing as a contractor had worked for that carrier briefly, then left a digital trail of stolen dispatch templates. He understood cameras, toll patterns, and how to bend the timing of people who worked graveyard shifts with tired eyes. Ortiz did not say solved aloud in front of anyone, and she used the gentle phrasing investigators save for families who have waited. She told them the discovery was due to a maintenance worker who kept notes, who walked slowly, and who refused to shrug. She mentioned the receipt that waited in a lip everyone missed, and she promised it would be handled with care. A week later, Dorian returned to the turnout with a new grate and a broom because he wanted the place to look tended. He replaced the odd bracket with the correct plate, tightened the bright bolt, and brushed the concrete until the dust lifted. Cars hissed past, and a train horn carried from somewhere distant, and the ditch water moved with a plain, steady sound. He thought about simple, measurable things as he loaded the cones and folded his checklist, and the tune finally came back. His father used to whistle that tune while changing oil in a gravel driveway under a high summer Sunday. He stood quietly, listened to wind in the pines, and let the ordinary noise of the road remind him why details matter. Karen's notebook went back under the counter, Orville's green ledger returned to a shelf, and the scrapyard ticket stayed scanned. The river cameras got a new maintenance sticker with a fresh signature line, and technicians added a habit of requesting 2 verifications. The county posted a small plaque at the turnout with no names, only a line about patience and careful work. When Dorian passed that spot after later storms, he slowed as a reflex, and he watched small things settle where gravity pointed. He understood that places remember without meaning to, and that a crumpled paper can hold a night in its faded stripe. He started stopping for coffee at the store more often, just to say hello and to count the steady ring of the doorbell. The road kept moving, trucks kept downshifting on the grade, and the turnout regained its ordinary shabbiness in summer heat. Dorian did not tell the whole story to anyone at the diner, and he did not dramatize what the cable hooks revealed. He kept the memory in the quiet pocket of workdays, where tools sat cleaned in their tray and notes lined up square. There was no miracle in any of it, only a patient chain of human attention passed hand to hand without ceremony. The receipt was not miraculous either. It was simply patient, wedged where water and wind forgot to sweep. A missing driver got his name back in a single sentence, and a family traded uncertainty for grief that could finally breathe. Years will pass, and that turnout will keep catching wrappers and leaves, and a worker will kneel to clear them. Someone will hum without knowing why, and maybe remember how a small slip of paper can outweigh a rumor. The place will not speak, yet it will still hold that long night in the print of its concrete, quiet as a held breath. Dorian drove away as shadows crossed the lane markers and the orange hood flashed twice in the side mirror. He felt lighter and heavier at the same time, which is how truth can sit after it finally finds a home. He did not chase the tune anymore, and he did not rush the checklist, because patient work had already taught him what mattered today. He believed there were other receipts under other lips somewhere, and he hoped other hands would take them gently. He kept his camera roll tidy, his gloves clean, and his pencil sharp enough to write down what needed remembering. The turnout stayed ordinary when he left, but the ordinary held a story now, and that felt exactly right. The stories. Dispatcher, who kept the secret from a bridge call, the call began with the sound that never leaves him, a river hush that sat under a thin voice. On the log, it read as a welfare check near the west span. The timestamp matched the shift change. The tower camera sent a smeared view of headlights, and the wind pushed rain and slanted ropes across steel. He wrote the first line in block letters. Male caller. Alone? No traffic lane blocked. Unknown age. Unknown intent. In training, they, from the start, had said the first 10 seconds decide the rest. He believed that for years. He had a plain goal that night. Finish paperwork early, drink the cold coffee anyway, and get home before midnight. Kellen Duarte, age 38, worked as an emergency dispatcher in a river town that never liked headlines. He lived quiet. 2 rooms over a grocery where the owner knew his name and saved him bruised peaches. He was good at the slow voice and the clear questions. He kept a notebook with dates and little arrows. On the tape, his opening line sounded the same as always. County Communications, tell me what is happening. The caller coughed, then said he was at the railing near the center truss. He asked for no sirens. Kellen clicked a marker on the map and moved the cursor a hair so the unit tags would not overlap. He asked for a name, and the caller hesitated like he was picking one from a shelf he had not visited. Call me Ross, the man said, then added something about the water looking like foil if you did not blink. There was a push of air, like a mic against a jacket, and the traffic under the bridge hummed steady. Kellen kept the tone even, told Ross that people could meet him where he stood, and asked what brought him there. Someone I loved died on this bridge, Ross said. And his voice steadied, like he had waited to finally say it. In his log, Kellen wrote the words that mattered. Loss stated. Prior connection to scene. No weapons reported. Calm speech. From the other console, Nira scrolled road closures and passed him a sticky note that read, Northbound lane is clear. He muted the room feed for a second, so the printer squeal would not land in Ross's ear and spook him. He asked the year of the loss, and Ross said it fast, like it tasted bad. 2014. Kellen repeated the year and let the silence work while he dispatched a patrol car and a medic unit in the background. He knew the story people told about that year. A sedan climbed the curb during a storm and hit a contractor. The papers had run one photo of cones and a dropped hard hat. No names followed, just an archived blurb and rain. From the tower camera, a freight train horn carried along the riverbank, then faded as the unit names flashed en route. Kellen asked if Ross knew the person who died by name. Ross said he knew the face and the last words. A small thing changed in Kellen then. A sound from the record shelf in his mind fell flat and stayed there. He once took a midnight call from a work crew foreman near the same span. He kept that tape in memory. Ross said the last words were not for him. They were for a dispatcher who told the crew to hold 10 minutes. Kellen tapped the headset cushion, careful to keep the room quiet, and asked where Ross had heard those words. Ross said he had heard them from a phone found in a cracked case under the North Pier after the storm. He said the phone worked for one day after the rain stopped, and that he had played the last message recorded. He said the message was from County Communications with a different voice, and it told the crew to stay clear. Kellen felt the old shift wash through him. The storm year had ended in a tangle of rumors and a closed memo. He had read that memo while filing tired overtime sheets. He filed it without speaking and chose to keep moving. On the camera, one pair of headlights slowed near the shoulder as if a driver could sense the weight of the rail. Kellen radioed the nearest cruiser to stage 2 blocks off with lights off, and he asked Nira to notify the medic quietly. He asked Ross to tell him who the contractor was, and Ross said the name with a short stop between first and last. The name matched the contractor mentioned in the closed memo, except the memo had spelled the name without an accent mark. Kellen wrote the name as Ross said it, exact and careful, then underlined it once for the transcription that would follow. He asked Ross why he came now and not earlier, and Ross said an anniversary sits on the mind like a stone. He also said that the memo never named the dispatcher who told the crew to hold, which was why he had called. Kellen understood the shape of that ask, even if the words around it were soft. He was not supposed to name staff. The policy existed for safety and sanity, and it covered nights when grief needs a door and someone tries that door. He told Ross he could share what the record allows, and he asked if hearing the process might help him stand. Ross said hearing the process might help, though he refused the idea of sirens again and asked for plain truth instead. Kellen kept his sentence length slow and warm. He said that storm calls can trigger staggered staging for worker safety. He said if there were downed lines or compromised joints, a hold might be given while a state engineer was patched in. He also said that every such hold carried timestamps, and that those stamps were kept by policy for 7 years. Ross breathed in and asked what happens when 7 years have passed, and Kellen answered before he could think of softness. He said the system cycles recordings to deep archives after 7 years, and some are erased when retention windows expire. Ross said he had a copy in case the archive could not confirm. Then he claimed the voice on the tape named a company. He said the tape used a phrase that a dispatcher would not use unless someone off-channel asked for a careful delay. Kellen had heard that phrase once. It was the night a junior engineer requested a slow approach while a supervisor closed a lane. The phrase was not suspicious by itself, and yet, in memory, it wore the shape of a request he never liked. He asked Ross to read the phrase, and Ross said it. Hold 10 for a clear handoff if site control is missing. Nira glanced over with a look that said, do not get pulled into the river. Kellen nodded and kept the pace steady. He told Ross he could not speak to motives of old voices, and he could not name a colleague or contractor from memory. He said he could meet Ross with a sergeant who knew the policy, and they could file a supplemental report for records. Ross said he was tired of reports. Then he asked a new question. Was someone paid to push that hold in the storm? Kellen chose his words like glass marbles placed in a line. He said he had not seen evidence that proved a bribe. He said he had seen maintenance slips that missed dates in years with bad weather, and he had seen budgets cut twice. He said contracts sometimes shifted mid-season, and miscommunication could look like intent when viewed through grief and time. The cruiser staged in the dark lot of a bait shop, and the medic idled near a closed diner with frosted windows. The tower camera picked up 2 figures near the midspan, and the wind made their jackets move like wet flags. Kellen asked Ross if someone stood with him, and Ross said a cyclist had stopped and was holding a flashing light. He asked the cyclist for the phone, and the cyclist, shouting through wind, said he would hold the light where Ross stood. Kellen brought the cruiser onto the bridge, slow and quiet, then asked Ross to look over his right shoulder for headlights. He said he would keep talking while the car approached, and he would ask simple things about the person lost. Ross began to tell a short life. He said she had a laugh that came in bursts, and she liked folded maps. He said she had taken a night shift to help a younger sister, and she kept a lanyard with a faded tag. He said he watched her set cones before the storm hit, and he watched the curve where the sedan took the line. He said no one saw the driver afterward, and the report guessed water pushed evidence downriver where it turned to silt. He said the tape he found made his chest hurt because someone with a badge kept people where the wind was worst. Kellen said he heard the pain and he believed the sincerity. Then he asked Ross to step back from the rail 1 foot. He said small choices add minutes, and minutes stack into plans, and plans turn into days that someone can live through. The cruiser moved a foot at a time. The officer called in with a whisper to confirm eyes on the subjects. The wind kicked a tab of paper along the sidewalk, and the camera caught it hopping like a small animal in rain. Kellen asked Ross about the cracked case at the pier, and Ross said the fisherman who found it gave him the phone. He said he cleaned the mud with rice and heat, and the screen woke like a held breath and showed the saved audio. Kellen pictured a kitchen table with towels and a humming space heater and the stubborn work of saving a last voice. He told Ross that someone who would do that kind of work could also stand away from the edge and breathe tonight. Ross said people kept calling him crazy when he brought the phone around, and one clerk said to forget old storms. He said he would go if someone could promise the message would not vanish into a hole where things get lost. Kellen had a rule: never promise anything that depends on someone else. He made a different promise instead and wrote it down. He said he would take a copy himself, and he would log it as a citizen recording attached to a supplemental report. He said he would list the time and origin as provided, and he would initial the line and add a contact number. Ross went quiet, and the wind filled the line again, and the cruiser stopped a car length away with no flashers. The officer on the bridge said he saw a second person keeping distance, and the cyclist raised the light toward the railing. Kellen asked Ross if hearing a small true thing might help him come off the rail. Ross told him to say it plain. Kellen told him there was an internal review back then, and it did not find a bribe, but it did find a silence. He said a manager failed to file a conflict disclosure, and a vendor had a nephew on a crew scheduled for that week. He said the manager resigned before the report made the rounds, and the findings lived behind a line marked personnel matter. He said he had read that line with tired eyes and wished it said more, and that was the part he kept. He did not say the other part out loud, which was the line about a recommended reprimand for delayed notifications. He did not say the name of the dispatcher who missed a handoff while moving units during the storm shift. He did not say that the reprimand belonged to him for a calendar mistake that lost 2 minutes when the server lagged. He believed the 2 minutes had not caused the death, yet he carried them like a coin that burned his pocket. Ross stood very still. He asked why no one told the public that someone had been asked to resign quietly. Kellen said the county tells what it must by law, and the rest gathers dust and waits for someone to ask again. He said he understood that wait, then asked Ross to walk toward the cruiser while the cyclist kept the light behind. Ross said he wanted to hand the phone over himself and watch it enter the chain that could not be erased. Kellen told the officer to receive the device and document the handoff on camera. Then he told the medic to stage closer. He kept talking to Ross about the quiet details of grief as the officer moved with hands open and calm shoulders. Ross stepped away from the rail, and the wind made the tension a little louder. Then the cruiser door clicked open. The officer took the phone and read the time on the screen for the camera, then thanked Ross and nodded at the cyclist. The medic stepped out with a blanket and stood near, and the cyclist said he would bike Ross home if that helped. Kellen set the line to a low hold and told Nira to mark the recording flagged for retention review and supervisory copy. He also wrote a note for himself to call records in the morning and ask for a manual pull from the deep archive. He would say the citizen copy exists and should be paired with any surviving log from the storm year for clarity. He would not say the rest, which was that he had been the one to misread the calendar view during a switch. He shifted to the closing questions that help people move. Any harm today? Any plan tonight? Any safe place to stay? Ross said he would stay with a friend who owed him a favor, and he would bring coffee to the cyclist as thanks. He said he would wait to hear if the recording matched the archive, and he would not visit the bridge again at night. Kellen said someone would call him within 3 business days, which felt safe to offer, and he wrote his own number anyway. He signed the log with a quick line and filed the incident under welfare resolved with evidence collected and no injury. The bridge camera caught the cruiser pulling away slow while the medic followed, and the cyclist lights faded toward the trail. Nira slid over a cup with fresh coffee and asked if he was okay, and he said yes since people had stepped off safe. He picked up his notebook and drew a small square around the words he had written, which read, "Keep the silence clean." He drove home as rain dripped from the awning of the grocery, and the owner waved from a dark window with a thin smile. He unlocked the door and set his notebook on the table. Then he took the spare tape recorder from a drawer beside the sink. He spoke the date and the incident number and a short summary. Then he said 7 words that were just for the tape. He said the bridge call reminded him why small errors multiply and why a person can choose to carry them alone. In the morning, he brought the tape to the records clerk as a personal note to accompany the citizen copy for context. He did not include the part about his own reprimand, which lived on paper in a file that no one requested. He told the clerk that the caller needed confidence, that the system held memory, and the clerk said that part was done. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived to confirm the match, and the archived call contained the same phrase and timing. The letter said the review board would annotate the old memo to reflect the vendor relationship that had been missed. It also said the findings still pointed to weather and a panicked driver as primary causes rather than any delayed instruction. Kellen stood at the window and read the lines twice, then folded the letter and slid it under the notebook cover. He walked the long way to work and past the river that pretended to be quiet, while tugs moved lumber under the span. He thought about the part he had kept and judged whether it belonged in daylight or whether it still lived best in private. He decided to hold it until it served someone to hear it, which was not the same as hiding, and felt closer to care. The stories. Ranger Station Ledger flagged a missing permit at dawn. At first light, the Ranger Station Ledger spat out an alert that one backcountry permit number did not reconcile with issued copies. The overnight dispatcher circled the entry in red marker and wrote missing, which was the only word nobody wanted to see. Latham Reyes was 39 and worked as a field ranger who managed trailheads, radios, and the old metal key cabinet. He clocked in early, poured coffee into a chipped mug, then read the ledger twice and felt the room shrink. The permit number matched a reservation tied to a solo hiker who had not checked out by yesterday's sunset. The name read Tomas Halper, age 37, and the emergency contact line ended with no answer recorded. The station had a routine for this exact situation, which looked simple on paper and complicated in real life. He pulled the overnight radio log and the reservation printouts, then called the county dispatch desk for archived calls. The dispatcher on duty answered with a clipped voice and confirmed one brief call near dusk from a nearby pullout. The call dropped before the location pinged twice, so they logged it as incomplete. The park sat in a mountain chain that people photographed from a highway turnout that smelled like hot brakes in summer. Locals said the place had thin borders where trails overlapped with old timber tracks and forgotten mining access roads. Latham set a simple goal for the day, which was to verify whether Tomas walked out early and skipped the desk. Some hikers did that, and he hated how often it fooled staff into sounding alarms. He decided to check cameras at the east exit and the service road past the old quarry first. He taped the ledger alert to his clipboard, added radio times from the night log, then headed for the truck with a paper map. A gray Subaru with mud caked behind the plates sat in the day lot under a fading trailhead sign. The plate number matched the permit file, so the vehicle check became the trigger that changed the plan entirely. His voice on the radio stayed steady, but he felt that familiar pressure behind the eyes that always came with missing cars. The last ranger who ignored a parked car overnight still had nightmares about the aftermath that followed. Latham walked a slow circle around the Subaru and took photos of the interior through the windows. He counted a blue windbreaker, a gas station coffee cup, a folded receipt, and an orange wrapper with the corner torn off. He logged the items in his notes and called the plate to the county line to confirm registration. The response came back clean, with a mailing address to a city 2 hours away and no active warrants. 2 backpackers in their late 20s shuffled by and looked at the Subaru like it might answer a question. The woman spoke first and said they passed a guy at the junction near the ridge after a late climb. She described a man with a close beard, a faded cap, and a limp that looked like a boot rubbing wrong. She added that he asked about the shortcut to the lake, which did not exist, then waved and kept moving. The guy with her nodded, then said the man had a new pack that made his shoulders ride up like he was not used to it. Witness statements always came salted with memory gaps, yet both details felt real in a way that mattered. Latham thanked them, wrote their names and numbers, then reminded them to check out at the station before they left town. He pulled the dash cam card from the station truck used on the evening loop and plugged it into the office laptop. The last loop showed nothing on the service road, then a fragment of taillights near the quarry gate at gray dusk. The timestamp matched the brief call window from dispatch, which made his coffee taste like metal. He froze the frame where the taillights blinked and magnified the shot until the pixels bled and swam. The shape of the car looked like a small pickup with a roof rack, which did not match the Subaru in the lot. He saved the frame, printed it, and stapled it to the ledger alert for a later look. He called the quarry foreman on the number posted by the locked gate, then asked whether any crews ran equipment after hours. The foreman swore nothing moved, then said the gate lock had a stiff shackle that hated winter, which did not help much. A call came in from the store in the valley, where hikers bought dehydrated chili and overpriced fuel canisters in bright colors. The clerk said she recognized the name from the morning before and remembered that he used a prepaid card with a scratched strip. She mentioned he bought a paper map and a plastic whistle, then asked if everything was all right, which Latham did not answer directly. He requested the receipt copy and any camera footage that covered the register and door. The clerk said the owner saved footage for 2 weeks as a shoplifting deterrent, so she would print stills from around 9:15. The mention of a prepaid card added a wrinkle that he did not like, because it cut down searchable paper trails by a lot. He wrote it down anyway, then underlined it twice and moved on. He drove to the ridge trailhead and checked the kiosk log where people still wrote their plans with dull pencils. The entry for Tomas said out on Saturday, back by Sunday, route Circle Lake counterclockwise, camp night 1 near inlet. The loop around the lake had 4 clear stream crossings and 2 spots where cairns tempted new hikers into old fire scars. He looked for additional notes and found a faint scrawl that read, "Saw tent near logjam after dark," which lacked a dateline. He took a photo, then turned to the ridge where the wind pushed low clouds across a face that liked to break ankles. He walked the first mile with his radio on scan and found fresh boot prints that veered onto the quarry track despite a closed sign. The prints were deep on the outer heel, which matched the reported limp, and the spacing suggested someone who favored the right leg. The quarry track dropped behind fir trees and came out near a rusted gate with a battered lock that still hung closed. A torn strip of fabric in a dull blue shade clung to a stump where a person might squeeze past the hinge. He bagged the strip, wrote the time, then looked up to see crows cross low and fast like bad messengers. He followed the track to a flat where water pooled in old ruts and reflected a sky that never looked friendly in March. A mound of gravel showed fresh tire marks with an odd zigzag that looked like someone learning a clutch by feel. He crouched and ran a finger along the rut wall and felt dust that had not settled into crust, which put the timing close. The quarry foreman had denied any late activity, so the marks likely tied to whoever drove near the gate at dusk. He shot photos, measured the width with a broken stick and a tape, then plotted the line on his map. Back at the station, he spread the notes, photos, and the printed taillights frame across a desk that had a gouge shaped like Idaho. He listened to the archived dispatch call again, which captured a short, breathy voice, saying quick words that fractured with static. The caller had said something that sounded like lost permit or lost person, then a muffled clack, and the line fell quiet. He played the clip 5 times and wrote down 2 interpretations with a question mark, which was the style the supervisor liked. The radio log from hikers listed a second-hand report from a fisherman who heard a whistle near the inlet after dusk. The fisherman had used a cheap handheld radio with a weak battery, so the recording lived as a line of text and not a voice. That was fine, because the whistle purchase from the Valley store had already planted itself in his mind as a breadcrumb. Late morning brought a small-town police officer named Mara Key, who handled the highway stretch that touched the park border. She was 33 and worked patrol shifts that crossed into everything that did not fit elsewhere. She parked by the Subaru and walked up with a notepad and a friendly face that could turn sharp in a second. They stood by the hood and traded notes that barely needed full sentences after years of joint calls. She said the highway turnout camera caught a gray pickup with a roof rack at 1842, heading toward the quarry. She added that a volunteer firefighter reported an unusual truck bed loaded with tarps after 9 near the county line. Latham held up the taillight's print and said the shape tracked with what she had. She nodded, then asked whether the missing permit might actually be a duplicate number from a previous season. He blinked once, then went very quiet because that question hit a different nerve. Permit numbers rolled over every winter long before the system went digital, and some older blocks had gaps and repeats. The ledger printed the flag because the manual book showed the number as issued to a different name in late fall. He dug into the archive cabinet that breathed dust and pine and pulled the worn book from the shelf, marked 98. The ink on the page showed the same number assigned to a group from a climbing club from a city 3 hours west. The lead name read Rayan Cade, age 32, and a phone number that matched a defunct area code now recycled. He compared the handwriting from both permit slips and saw the same loop on the number 4 in the dateline. That did not make sense until he looked at the clerk's signature, which matched a retired staffer who kept garage sales every summer. He wrote down the name and the year in words so the report would not kick back for formatting later. He stepped outside and called the retired clerk on a personal number found in an old staff tree near the copier. The woman sounded bright and happy to hear a ranger voice, then quieted when he explained the duplicate number issue. She said she used to pre-write permits during busy seasons to speed lines, then fill names in with a light touch. She added that some pads got stored in a desk drawer after winter changeover and might have ended up in the surplus box. That surplus box sometimes went to the annual trailer sale with old radios and busted snowshoes for pocket change. He felt his throat go dry and asked whether any blank slips could be floating in the world with the seal already stamped. She said it was possible, then apologized and said nobody had asked about that practice since 1998 ended. He thanked her gently and wrote a note for the supervisor that would not make anyone cheerful. The store clerk sent stills that showed Tomas at the counter holding a paper map in a stiff hand with a white bandage. The timestamp read 9/12, which lined up with when the trailhead sign-in sheet filled up. A second still showed a man behind him wearing a quarry company cap who bought batteries and jerky. That detail landed like a small stone in a bigger pond because of the quarry track prints and the taillight's frame. Latham called the quarry foreman again and asked to see the shift roster for the past 2 days. The foreman sighed and said he would email a screenshot since office rules required written requests for full copies. The screenshot arrived with smudged names and a note about 2 contractors hired short-term for cleanup after heavy rain. One contractor matched the cap logo from the still, which felt like a door creaking open after a stubborn winter. Latham and Officer Key drove to the quarry safety office, which smelled like coffee and oil and a fight nobody wanted. The foreman met them with a clipboard and a face that said he hated unexpected questions on a weekday. Key kept her voice friendly and asked to speak with the contractor who wore the cap with the same faded stitch. The foreman said the man was named Vicente Rowe, age 36, who lived in a rented room above the tire shop. He added that Rowe had left early the previous night because a radiator hose blew near the county line. Key asked to see the truck, and the foreman pointed to a gray pickup with a rack and tarps bunched in back. The bed still held a coil of new rope, a rusted shovel, and a muddy cooler that smelled like lake water and gasoline. Latham felt that metallic taste again, which was never a sign of a good afternoon ahead. Rowe arrived from the far lot with hands raised and a look that said he already knew why they were here. He said he had filed a work order for the hose, which they confirmed with a carbon sheet and a phone photo. Key asked whether he had been near the lake after dark, and he said he left the quarry road to test the hose under load. He added that he pulled aside at the turnout near the inlet and heard a whistle that made him wonder about a prank. He did not call anyone because his phone was dead after streaming music during cleanup, which landed badly but not impossibly. He said he saw a small tent by the logjam and a lantern glow. Then a figure waved and yelled something about a permit. Key wrote it down and asked for permission to look inside the cooler, which Rowe granted with a shrug and a steady jaw. Inside lay 2 empty water jugs, a crumpled fuel canister sleeve, and a plastic whistle in an unopened bag from the Valley store. Back at the station, Latham laid the whistle sleeve next to the store receipt copy and saw a mismatch in barcode digits. The sleeve in the cooler matched an older shipment code that the store had sold out months ago during a discount run. That meant the whistle in the cooler likely came from a different source than the one Tomas bought at 912. He looked again at the still where Tomas held the map with the bandaged hand and noticed a line of dried mud on the cuff. The mud looked pale and powdery, which matched the quarry fill used to stabilize the service road after storms. He wrote a timeline that pinned Tomas at the store, then likely at the quarry road, and finally near the inlet after dusk. He wrote a parallel line for Roe that put him at the quarry, then on the same road, then near the inlet while testing a repair. The lines felt too neat until he added the duplicate permit issue that now seemed like a hinge rather than a footnote. He dug into the city address on file for Tomas and found a rental building with mailboxes that had newer locks installed last winter. The property manager answered with the cheerful speed of someone who wanted a clean day and already knew it was lost. She said a man with that name had paid cash, kept to himself, and left 2 weeks early with no forwarding note. She also said a different name had appeared on a delivery label once, which the courier mentioned when buzzing the wrong unit. The alternate name sounded familiar, and it clicked only when he reopened the 1998 ledger page. It matched the lead from the old climbing club permit, which tied the duplicate number to a person who should have aged out by now. The detail did not mean they were the same person, but it did mean someone liked to reuse names tied to old paper. Officer Key ran the alternate name through an old case index that kept records of search and rescue incidents on paper and microfilm. A report from 2 winters back described a fake distress call at the same inlet that lured volunteers into a risky night crossing. The caller used a prepaid phone and a different name, yet the voice transcription carried similar clipped phrasing and rushed breaths. The motive at the time seemed like a cruel prank, and nobody had linked it to anything tangible after the snow melted. Latham rechecked the gap between the whistle report and the dropped call and found a sliver where a person could move a short distance. He called the firefighter who reported the unusual truck bed and asked whether the tarps had looked wet or pulled tight. The firefighter said the tarps were tied tidy and dry, then added that the driver waved like a man who wanted to be seen. Afternoon shadows drew long, so they hiked to the inlet with a drone from the county that tracked heat signatures. The drone skimmed treetops and sent back images of the logjam, the bank, and the flat near the old survey marker. No body, no fresh campsite, just flattened grass near the logjam where a tent might have stood during a short decoy. They found 2 sets of prints, one deep on the right heel and one narrower with an even stride that cut toward the quarry track. Near the water line, he found a paper map folded in a way he recognized from the still, which made his chest go tight. The map held a smear of pale mud and a faint X near the old prospector's trail that dead-ended at a slide. He bagged the map and stared at the X until it felt like it stared back, then marked the spot on his own copy. The slide path opened into a shallow cut with wooden forms left from a never-finished footbridge project funded in 2005. He followed the forms until he reached a square of ground tamped hard as a table near a tree with a scar. The earth felt too tidy for random hikers, and the tree scar had fresh resin that caught light in a clean yellow bead. He brushed aside pine duff and found a buried plastic box that held a stack of old permit slips with the seal already stamped. The slips matched the retired clerk's pre-written style, and several had Rayan Cade typed in a cheap courier font. A second stack carried blank lines and a stamp pad spot like a kit for people who wanted official-looking paper for a plan. He felt a chill that did not come from wind, then called Key over and photographed the box from 3 angles. The twist revealed itself slowly, as if embarrassed to be simple after such a day of layered rumors and tire marks. Someone had staged a missing hiker using a duplicated permit number and a prepaid trail of receipts to trigger a standard response. The purpose was not to vanish, but to bait a small law enforcement swarm toward the lake while a second person moved cargo from the quarry. The zigzag tire marks in the gravel now read like a practice route for a heavy load that needed a quiet window. The fisherman's whistle and the tent glow created a cautious pause in anyone tempted to check the inlet on foot. The taillights near dusk were a partner vehicle that pulled close to the logjam, then backed out during the start of the false search. The target was not a person, but scrap copper and tools stored in a locked shed near the service road past the old quarry. They found the shed lock sliced clean with a battery saw when they returned with the foreman and a bolt cutter key. The inventory list taped inside showed spools of copper wire and fuel additives that had resale value in cash-only salvage yards. The contractor truck bed dimensions matched the load footprint on the dusty floor, and a partial shoe print matched the even stride near the inlet. The limp prints belonged to whoever wore a new boot wrong, which now felt like another layer for misdirection rather than a true injury. When confronted, Rowe did not fold, but the quiet employee who ran the tire shop room rentals gave a statement. He said Rowe met a man who matched Tomas in the parking lot and moved tarps between vehicles near sunset. He added that Rowe left after 9 with the bed loaded to the rails, which aligned with the firefighter observation with uncomfortable precision. The county prosecutor would need clean evidence, so they worked careful and slow to gather the chain. The paper box of pre-written permits became a centerpiece, since it explained how the ledger flag could be predicted in advance. The duplicate number drew attention at dawn by design, which pulled eyes away from the road where cargo rolled past a gate. The prepaid receipt at the Valley store placed a decoy at a predictable time, which witnesses could later repeat with conviction. The dropped call created a sympathetic recording in the archive that every incident review would elevate in urgency. The taillights in the dash cam and the turnout camera filled the gaps with enough glow to animate a story that felt real. None of it solved every moment, yet together it built a scaffold sturdy enough for charges that did not fall apart. They never found a body by the inlet, which fit the theory that nobody had been in true danger that night. A week later, a different store camera captured Tomas in a neighboring county buying a tire patch kit with a clean, unbandaged hand. The clip went into the case file under reportedly cited, along with a printout of the copper sales ledger from a salvage yard off the highway. Rowe took a short plea on theft and tampering with evidence, which irritated people who liked long answers. The paperwork on the duplicate permits triggered a policy change that barred pre-writing anything since 2021 onward. The retired clerk cried in the parking lot when she learned her old shortcuts had fed a scam, then hugged Latham like a nephew. He told her people adapt to pressures they do not design, and the fix mattered more than the blame. When the Subaru finally left the lot on a tow, the trailhead looked as ordinary as a grocery aisle on a Tuesday. Officer Key stood with her hands in her jacket and watched the tow lights climb the hill toward the highway. She said the simplest cons always hide in systems that run on habit and paperwork. Then she smiled without much humor. Latham looked at the ridge where the wind never ran out, then at the ledger that still sat on the desk. He thought about the whistle and the map and the soft faith people place in official stamps and good intentions. Later, he locked the station, and the rafters creaked in the cool like an old house learning a new rule. He drove past the turnout and looked once at the lake, which held its secrets with the stubborn patience of cold water and granite. He told himself they had not solved every detail, but they had nudged the pattern toward daylight, which was enough for now. The stories. This motel room voicemail rerouted search teams that winter. They kept saying it started with a motel room that smelled like old coffee and bleach, and with a voicemail nobody expected. The recordings came out in late winter after a storm knocked power across the county and kicked the motel phones awake again. Rhea Tavener was 37 and worked as an emergency coordinator for a spread-out mountain county that never felt ready. She had a habit of keeping paper maps rolled in a rubber band and a small camera tucked under her parka. That morning, she wanted only to rebalance commitments and check that the warming shelter had enough cots for the week. She planned to drive the Ridge Road, swing by the radio repeater, and be back before lunch. The incident started when the Nightlark Motel on the highway called the non-emergency line with a strange message they could not clear. The manager, a tired man named Cal Rudd, told the dispatcher that a red light on room 26 blinked, and the phone kept chiming. He said the display showed a new voicemail that would not delete, and he wanted someone to listen because the guest had left. Rhea took the secondary call because the sheriff's deputies were stacked with fender benders on the main grade. She arrived to find the lobby heater making a low metallic whine, and Cal behind a counter with a cracked bell. He slid the room key and nodded toward the outside corridor, his voice flat from too many nights at the same desk. Rhea used nitrile gloves from her field kit, then lifted the handset and dialed the code that the placard said would access messages. The voicemail opened with a tone and a computerized voice reading the timestamp in a clipped monotone. The date announced sounded like last night near 10, according to her quick notes scratched with a blunt pencil. The message that followed had the kind of audio that police technicians describe as close but muddy, and it made her shoulders rise. A woman whispered that a man was hurt, and she asked for help. Then she mentioned mile marker numbers and a guardrail that bent inward toward a runoff ditch. There was wind noise and the distant thrum of trucks, and what Rhea believed might be the quick chirp of a turn signal. The caller finished with words that sounded like two names, then a tired exhale, then silence long enough to raise goosebumps on her arms. By the time she walked back to the lobby, the dispatcher had already compared mile markers that matched those numbers on the East Highway spur. A search team was gathering at the fairgrounds with 2 four-wheelers and a county plow driver who knew every ditch by seat memory. Rhea signed the log and relayed what she heard, and her own words hardened into directions that sent good people toward a cold bend. An hour later, a second caller reached the tip line and said they had heard the same voicemail when calling the motel to complain about their refund. That person repeated the marker numbers and added that a dog barked once in the background, which persuaded the consensus further. Witness statements began clustering around the East Spur, and a deputy noted in the dispatch log that he had seen a bent guardrail near marker 32 2 days prior. The search teams rolled that way in a slow line of lights that looked brave against the blank sky. Rhea drove separately and scanned plow berms that faced the wind, because snow settles in patterns that trap fresh tire ruts longer. She told herself that the timestamp was clean, and that the voice felt close, and that people needed her to stay practical. The first mile produced a stranded sedan with a dead battery and a sheepish driver, and the second mile delivered a drift that swallowed half the lane. They found nothing that matched a serious wreck, only plastic shrapnel and a glove lost last week, which made her think about timing again. Back at the fairgrounds, a radio operator replayed the voicemail on a speaker, and the group leaned in. Rhea asked Cal for the motel's phone vendor contact, and he brought out a binder with hand-printed notes in thick marker. She called the vendor and asked about power cycles and about date behavior when the system lost time, and the technician promised to check archival events. She returned to the voicemail and listened for anything that placed a person rather than a highway, because people leave fingerprints in sound if you keep still. The second listen gave her something new that felt small but pointed. Right after the caller said the mile marker numbers, the wind changed tone for half a second, then a faint clack sounded like an elevator door. That did not belong near a rural guardrail, and it made her write elevator with a question mark next to it, which was not her usual habit. She also caught the soft bleep of a room keycard reader, which could have been the motel hallway if the phone had been on speaker, or a different building entirely. She left the fairgrounds and drove back to the Nightlark with the camera on the seat, planning to map every sound in the hallway against her memory. Cal mentioned that room 26 sat above the ice machine and that the elevator had a sticky door that made a little clap. She asked who stayed in that room last night, and his ledger showed a single occupancy, paid in cash, by someone who wrote a name that did not match any local license. He shrugged and said the guest checked out at 6 and that housekeeping already turned the room. Rhea asked to see the housekeeping cart, and the housekeeper, a careful woman named Jillian North, said she had found the room tidy. Jillian said the phone had been off the hook at first, which she corrected, and she said the window faced the back lot where trucks idled. Rhea asked if anyone had used the lobby phone when power returned, and Jillian said a traveler borrowed it while waiting for a ride that morning. That detail felt important because lobby phones sometimes route through the same server as the room phones, which can create strange behavior. The vendor called back and reported that their server recorded an abnormal offset during the storm, which could shift timestamps for local voicemail. He said the system fell back to a factory clock tied to a different zone, and then resynced once the internet returned, which can mislabel messages. He promised to send a small report, and Rhea wrote down the gist, then underlined the word offset because she disliked anything that moved signposts during a search. The dispatcher added a note in the log with that information, and the group paused to reassess direction. Rhea listened again and measured the gaps between key clicks and the turn signal chirp, and she kept hearing something like a vending machine compressor. She stepped into the hallway and held her phone down by the ice machine, and her recording later showed the same humming cadence. The voicemail might not have been a live plea from a ditch, but could instead be a message recorded in the building and then captured by the motel system during the storm. She asked Cal whether any old messages archived on the server could return as new after a reset. Cal admitted that he had once lost all messages after a lightning strike and then found them again as new after a technician visit. He said the phone guy joked about ghosts calling back to settle their bills, which did not sound funny to Rhea at that moment. She pressed for dates and asked whether past incidents lined up with heavy weather, and he nodded toward a clipboard full of repair tickets. The dates matched cold weeks when snow slid from the roof, and the idea of an old message waking up felt more likely with each line. The next step was to figure out who had left the recording, and whether the details pointed to the East Spur or somewhere entirely different. Rhea asked for prior registration cards for room 26, and Cal produced a stack bound with a rubber band that snapped on the counter. She gently sorted through and found a multi-night stay from late last winter under a name that also did not match a license. The rate was discounted for cash, and the note column said, "Truck Lot View," which fit the sound of idling engines in the message. She then called the State Patrol office and asked for any incidents last winter that involved a bent guardrail near any similar marker numbers. The trooper on duty searched reports and told her there had been a slide-off on the West Highway spur near marker 32 during a storm in late February. He said the driver had fled before dawn, and a passing snowplow called it in, and the car was recovered later without injuries, according to the archived calls. That wreck would have put a person back in town by breakfast, and possibly in a motel room across from trucks. Rhea returned to the audio and timed the interval between the words and the faint elevator clap, and then timed the lobby elevator with her own phone recording. The match was not perfect, but close enough that a court would likely call it consistent under ordinary conditions, according to her training notes. She also realized the turn signal chirp probably belonged to a guest being dropped at the front door, not a car on the highway. The dog bark could have been a pet in the lot, which often happens near the vending area after check-in. She asked the radio operator to broadcast a simple clarification and to slow the east spur sweep while a second team checked the west. The deputy, who remembered the bent rail on the east, admitted he might have mixed the side of the county in his earlier note, which happens when shifts run long. The west team found the old repair spot with fresh snow around the posts and an evidence marker for a past accident half buried under ice.